very pleased to welcome you to this webinar on adaptation, bottom up and top down. We need them both. And I'll introduce our first speaker in a moment, but I'm hoping that we'll have plenty of time for questions. And at the end, to ask questions, use the little hand signal. I'm just wanting to make sure that, I think that's in React. Yes, I think. In React, you will get a little hand signal for questions. Okay, so the first speaker is Marie Becdelievre, who is a senior officer in the climate team of Nelson City Council, and with a particular responsibility for work on adaptation. So may I invite you to begin, Marie?
Yes, thank you, Joanna. Kia ora, everyone. Thanks, Joanna, for inviting me to speak in this webinar. I always love talking about adaptation. That's my thing. And I will just share my slides. There you go. Can everybody hear me well? Yes. All right, I might just give you a very brief bio. So I have been at council for 2 years, and I found I got this position just after finishing my studies. So I went back to university in 2017 to do exactly, to get a job exactly like this one. I started getting worried about climate change about 15 years ago. And when I had my first child and went back to university, really aiming to be able to work in the adaptation space. And I did a couple of degrees. The last one was a Master of Science, but with a social science angle and about understanding complex climate risk and how people perceive those risks and imagine the future, and how with these two things in mind, how they perceive risk and how they envision the future, or how that informs their responses today. So it's a very, I find it a really fascinating area to really understand what motivates people to do what they do, and very useful today for what I'm doing. So Joanna, I aimed for the 20 minutes. I will try to stick to it, but yeah, feel free to stop me if I might go over by a few minutes, but feel free to stop me. I'll be happy to share the slides after anyway. All right, so a top-down perspective. I will start with the global emissions and a brief overview. So this graph shows the gray curve is the global emissions, annual emissions, and the blue one is the concentration of carbon in the atmosphere. So we can see that the global emissions just keep rising. They went down for a little bit during COVID by about 3%, and everybody worked really, really hard to get the economy back up and running. And so the emissions rose again. But there is, globally, they are slowing down a little bit, the annual emissions. Not yet plateauing, but because they are not going down, we see the global atmospheric carbon dioxide concentration in the atmosphere. Just it keeps increasing, and so therefore adaptation is becoming something ever more pressing. So the result of these global emissions, that's a really nice infographic that I found the other day that shows the range of risk. I'm sure most people in this room know what we are talking about, but I thought I was going to share that one anyway. So on the left side, we've got the extreme weather event. On the right side, the slow onset events. It's covering pretty much everything. The only thing that's missing, and that's quite an important one, it's ocean deoxygenation. So as the oceans warm, they can contain less oxygen. And I think globally, on average, the oxygen content has gone down by almost 1%, in some places by almost 4%. And that's hugely problematic for fish. So there are the physical risks, but there are also something that are called the transition risks. So we just had a quick look at the physical risks. I have trouble talking about opportunities here, but some people see opportunities. And there are the transition risks. So the transition risks, they are, sorry, I will just move something. They are the risks that arise from major changes in in all of our systems, such as energy, transport, food, and finance, as society responds or not, or inadequately to climate change. And these include policy shifts, market disruptions, technology changes, and social pressures. And those transition risks, they just come and combine and interact with the physical risk in really complex ways, and are very complex to foresee often. And this infographic, it comes from a guidance that was published by the External Reporting Board to help organizations do their climate-related disclosures. So looking at both their emissions and their risks. And they have proposed a method to understand both physical risks and be able to create scenarios to consider the different options we've got available and test those options against the scenario. And actually, a quick note here that is a note of hope in the midst of all this grim news that I often bring, is that local government has started to use this methodology to understand physical risk and transition risks, and is with the help of one of the big consultancy firm that I can't remember the name of right now, but there will be scenarios, climate scenarios created for specifically local government to help us consider more than the physical risks, to consider the transition risks, and give us some tools to test our options through time and through different scenarios. There is also, and it's probably the thing that is the least talked about at this point, but we are going to hear from those more and more, is these are the global transboundary risks. So these are the risks that the impacts that happen elsewhere in the world and just cascade to a whole lot of places. And there are different categories of transboundary risk. There are the biophysical connections. So for example, we can think about changes in the ocean currents or atmospheric flows. There are risks to our shared resources. A good example is the extraction and processing of lithium for that can enable the electrification of a lot of things, transport in particular. And lithium is extracted and processed in South America, where water resources can be scarce. And lithium is really water intensive for extraction and processing. And so we might see some issues and shortages and supply disruptions of lithium, which would slow down the electrification. Obviously, food security, that's probably the most obvious. All the farming is the most vulnerable and sensitive sector to climate change. And most of our supermarkets are full of imported products. So this is a huge transboundary risk. There are our trade links. We can think here of ports. Obviously, the ports are highly exposed to storms and sea level rise. So they are really a weak point in our global system. The financial flows. So as climate impacts different regions, we might see disruptions in our supply chains, which disrupt economic activities. And so the financial flows might be impacted quite chronically going forward, and also disruption in the financial, the insurance sector, as the sector struggle to adjust its risk portfolio. There is human mobility. The World Bank, for example, estimates that in the next 50 years, we might see up to 200 million people who may need to move because the place where they live is no longer livable. And then diseases. We've got the diseases that come from moving species, like, for example, mosquitoes are migrating to adapt to climate change. And so we will see diseases traveling with animals and people. And we will see also new diseases appear most likely. All right, so that's a lot of risks to consider, a lot of risks that are growing, that are interconnected, and there is not a lot of adaptation so far happening. So there is something called the adaptation gap, and there is an actual definition for it. So it's the difference between what we would need to do and the resources we would need to do this to adapt to the impacts of climate change and the actual actions and resources available. So this gap includes financial, political, and technical shortcomings in addressing the growing risk from climate change. Since 2014, the UN Environmental Programme publishes a yearly report called the Adaptation Gap. And here I just wanted to show the cover of the last 3 reports. 2022, the title was Too Little, Too Slow. 2023, Underfinanced and Underprepared. And last year, Come Hell and High Water. These reports are becoming more and more alarmist, really, on the lack of adaptation in the face of our growing risks. Adaptation in practice. So this is where we step into the less grim picture. Adaptation can be a beautiful process and something that brings people together, and something that gives me a lot of hope, even if the challenge is there. So there is the definition of adaptation is responding together to current and future climate disruptions in a way that meets the needs of all communities and allows the natural world, people, and the economy to thrive. It has a few characteristics to be an adaptation that is ongoing and really addresses those most complex risks. The first one is it really is a collective project. No one will adapt in their little corner and be able to withstand what's coming. So we need to do it together. Adaptation is a very different way of thinking about the future. The future has always been difficult to predict, but it's becoming even more difficult to predict, and making decisions in those conditions requires new decision-making tools, and it requires our decision makers to really be on board with this different.
You don't want to go and see Helen?
It requires to have different tools to make decisions for adaptation, and tools that we have. And one day, if you want to know more about this, I'd be happy to be in another webinar to tell you more about this. Adaptation in practice must also be based on shared values and vision. To be a collective project, there must be a collective vision, and a vision that needs to accommodate the shared values, but also values that can differ because we don't necessarily all value the same things. So there is a lot of work to do on this, and how can we shape visions that give space for different values? It's going to be an ongoing process, and there will be, even if we stopped all emissions tomorrow, the world will keep changing for hundreds, if not thousands of years. So this is an ongoing practice that we must be familiar with. And it's an opportunity. For 4 years, if someone in the same sentence put adaptation and opportunity together, I really had a strong reaction to this. I just couldn't comprehend this idea, but I've changed my mind since then, and I see an opportunity to redesign our social, economic, and environmental systems, or socio-environmental systems, in a way more intentional way, and in a way that puts the well-being of people and other living beings at the forefront of our concerns. Now, we can't talk about adaptation without talking about resilience, the word resilience. And resilience is to adaptation what sustainability is to mitigation. And maybe not everybody shares this view, but I feel that the word sustainability has lost a lot of its meaning, and a lot of people understand sustainability in different ways. It can be used as well as a bit of a cop-out for action or as a way to give an illusion of action. And the word resilience is a little bit at risk of becoming the same thing. Also, it means a different thing for different people from in different fields. And there are good reflections to have on this term resilience, and I will talk to you a bit more about this soon when I talk about a case study, an adaptation case study. But in adaptation, it has a very specific meaning. Resilience is these four things. It's the ability to cope with shocks and stressors. It's the ability to adjust to what's happened. It's the ability to respond to a new normal, and it's the ability to transform the systems that can no longer function under this new normal. And I'd like to highlight this idea of adaptive capacity. The bulk of adaptation is there. It's preserving our ability to change and to make new conditions favorable. And adaptive capacity in practice or in the real world, it's to make sure that when we make a decision, when we make an adaptation decision and implement it, it doesn't lock us in to a certain path. We must have the focus must be in keeping our options open to a broad range of different future. And this is where the tricky part is. It's to make sure we keep our choices, the different pathways open. The adaptation process that all councils in New Zealand are following is the 10-step adaptation cycle that is often referred to as the Dynamic Adaptive Pathways Planning, DAP. It's a very standard adaptive management approach, so it's an iterative process. This one has 10 steps, but 5 broad questions that we are addressing. The first one is what is happening? And if you look at step 2 here, it says assess sea level rise and coastal hazard. And Joanna very rightfully pointed out to me that we need to pay attention to other things. And yes, absolutely. This wheel has coastal sea level rise and only sea level rise and coastal hazard because it came from a specific guidance for local government on those topics. And we had this wheel changed. I didn't have time to put it there, but we changed it to assess all climate-related hazards for this first step. The second question is looking at what matters most to us. So what are our values and our objectives as a community, as a society, as individuals as well, and then assess vulnerability and risk. More and more, a lot of us adaptation practitioners are thinking of swapping those two, because if we ask people what are their values and objectives as a local government body, and then there will be an expectations that we can do whatever we can to preserve those values and objectives. But some of those, once we understand the risk deeply, some of those values and objectives might need to be reviewed. And that doesn't create a really fertile ground for communication and collective undertaking to do it this way. So understand risk first, then we look at our values and objectives, and then we can say, yes, okay, we will work towards those things. The following question is, all right, now that we understand the risks and the vulnerabilities and where we want to go and what we want to do, what can we do about this? What options and pathways can we identify that will allow us to keep thriving despite change and stress? The following one is, how can we implement those strategies and preserve the adaptive capacity I was talking about? And then it's about having good monitoring system, keep an eye on what's happening in the world so we can adjust our actions and keep adjusting as we go, as we see the change occurring. And then we start again. I think no one has gone through a full circle yet in New Zealand, but I would say 6 to 10 year cycles is probably a realistic expectations for this process. Right now, we have NCC and TDC have been working together on a climate change regional risk assessment. It's finished. I mean, the consultants, Urban Intelligence, based in Christchurch, have delivered the final report. We are still reviewing it. There has been a bit of a it takes a lot of time, and councils are pretty tight on resources at the moment. There is a lot of demand on councils, with a lot of changes coming from central governments, but it's coming, and in the next couple of months we should be able to share the conclusions from the report and the report itself. And while we are waiting for this to happen, I'm preparing the next step, the step 5, identifying options and pathways. So this is where the rubber will really hit the roads, and I will list the things that I'm doing right now to prepare for this. So the first thing we did is identifying a first adaptation area. We can't adapt the whole of Nelson in one go. We have, again, resource constraints, so we need to look at different areas. So we looked at 4 or 5 different coastal areas in Nelson that are most at risk from the impacts of climate change. And we went through a bit of a prioritization process to identify one first adaptation area. And tomorrow there is a council meeting, and I'm presenting a report to elected members with a recommendation on which area we should go with first, and which community engagement method we should be using. So it's a public meeting, and you can watch it on YouTube either tomorrow or anytime, really. And we've also been doing an adaptation options catalog. So this one is almost done. There is a very long list of options, most of them that council can to some degree implement, and other options where we need to partner with other organizations and government entities. So yeah, a really big catalog, and it's an internal document for now, but we will make an external document as well as soon as we can. We are going to deepen the regional risk assessment. So we're going to do for that first area a local risk assessment, engaging with the community to really get a sense of what the community perceives, what's the experience of natural hazards, and get really that place-based understanding of risk. We're also going to integrate a risk tolerance assessment, and we are working to define Iwi Council working relationship for this work. So it's really important that Iwi and Council work together, particularly to understand risk from different perspectives, but also identifying options and pathways that satisfy the needs of all communities. And I have talked to the environmental managers of all of the Iwi from the top of the south. They are supporting our approach. They agreed with the recommendation for the first adaptation area, and they're really, really keen to engage with us. But Iwi, we know, are always extremely stretched in capacity. So it takes a little bit of time, but we'll get there. So I've reached out to the Marae, Whakatu Marae, and there is a strong desire to work together and define that working relationship. So we might do adaptation work planning at the same time, but we might not. So we need to see how can we, what sort of resources Iwi would need to do their own adaptation planning in their own time, if it's the need that they have. And then I've started drafting an engagement plan. That's something that is mobilizing a lot of my thoughts, because engagement for adaptation planning is a very specific type of engagement. It's quite a deep process. It's quite a committed process, and we need to reach out to as many people as possible, and not only the people who believe that climate change is a problem, but maybe more so the people who don't believe that climate change is a problem, because we need everybody on board. And there are ways to do this, and I will give you a couple of examples, especially one where the engagement the consultant really did an amazing, very inspiring job at engaging everybody into that adaptation planning work. Here is the example of a community involvement. It's what has been done in Westport. So the town of Westport will need to be relocated. So it's it's the most urgent adaptation need for like in New Zealand, it's the most extreme case where the relocation must be talked about right now and must be almost planned right now. And the consultant that did the engagement work is called ISMAS. They are based in Christchurch as well, and they had really a beautiful approach where they took the time to build a relationship, a meaningful relationship with the community, and it took quite a few months, but they really got there, and they got a lot of people involved and using a lot of design principles to get people to reimagine another Westport and to create a sense of excitement for a community who has been really traumatized by quite a few series of extreme events. I can see the time ticking, so I will try and wrap up quickly. And the other one that is inspiring us, it's the South Dunedin Future work, where same again, a long, very deep, meaningful engagement with the community. All right. One thing that is at the top of my concerns personally as an adaptation practitioner is that the financial pressure on central and local government are increasing, largely driven by extreme events that really drain the resources very fast and put councils in a debt position that is really problematic. So we've all seen this figure. I think it's the cost of the North Island events from 2023, 9 to 14 billion dollars this event, and recovering from that is pretty difficult. The relatively small event we had in Nelson in 2022, 77 million, sorry. This is the kind of thing, if it happens too often, it's difficult to be in a position where we can do a proactive adaptation. So we really need to get going before other events like this happen and prevent us from doing real proactive adaptation. This picture was taken on Monday, not this Monday, but the one before. We had a very intense, very short duration rainfall. I think we had about 25 millimeters of rain in about 3 hours, and the stormwater system got really overwhelmed. 20 properties were inundated. It wasn't foreseen. Like we knew there was going to be some rain, but it fell a lot faster, a lot more than what was expected. And it's typically the sort of event that just puts us on the back foot for adaptation, because it just takes resources again, mobilizes our engineers and council staff, and puts a lot of stress on everybody. And it costs money. Roads were damaged, and stormwater pipes were damaged, and houses. And that's also on top of a context of a contracting economy. I think we're recovering a bit at the moment, but we've got an economy that's already kind of looking a bit down. And so it's, again, I mean, money. Without money, we won't be able to do a lot. And the final slide is just a couple of reflections on who can do what from a top-down and bottom-up perspective. So the top-down is actually not a local government. The top-down is central government. It's state-led, it's technocratic, and it's expert-driven. It has a few characteristics: centralized decision-making, standardized infrastructure focus, and efficiency and control. So there is a space, of course, for those. We need some standardization, particularly in the risk assessment space, where all the methodology to understanding risks. So when we can compare things and we can use similar tools, and we don't have to have each council doesn't have to have its own tools. We need to centralize some things to cope with the lack of resources. There are risks with a top-down approach. There is context blindness. Adaptation is local, and so we need that really deep contextual framing that lacks when we take a top-down. It lacks those local voices, of course, especially marginal voices, and it provides a false sense of security that something is being done. Then there is the bottom-up, which is based on local knowledge, on participatory governance and community empowerment. Its characteristics is based on dialogue. It's flexible and it's diverse, and there is a focus on the social dimension. And it's a lot of learning by doing. And there are also risks from this perspective. There is limited resources as well and capacity of individuals and community groups to keep bringing that, to keep the momentum going. There are uneven power dynamics that can affect a bottom-up approach and kind of skew things down path that may not may present some injustices and not address inequities. And there is a risk of burnout of the people involved, and there is a lack of formal mandate, which is also a problematic thing. And then there is local government. So local government is really a bridge between the two. It's the agent of compliance for the top-down approach, and it's the enabler, often an enabler of bottom-up approaches. It has some strengths. We have a local government has a place-based legitimacy. It has a deep knowledge of the local context. It has convening power, can get people together. It can support local initiatives. But it is not a structure that has been built to handle the type of risk we're facing now. And so it's a structure that needs to change and that needs new capacity. But I must say, I'm seeing some shifts now that really gives me hope that is a structure that is going to change to be able to provide that role of bridge between the top down and the bottom up. It needs an adaptive leadership. This one is not yet really obvious, but the second one and the third one, they are. The cross-sector collaboration is really something that's coming up now. And we're seeing this, especially as we engage into the methodology of the external reporting board for the transition risk. So we're seeing this coming, which is great. And then a lot of system thinking as well coming with that. So things are happening very slowly, but they're happening. Yes. And that is my last slide. And yeah, I can't see you guys anymore, so I have zero feedback. But do we have time for questions now, or do you want to leave this for later, Joanna? What? Did I disappear?
No, sorry
I thought I
about
had
that.
disappeared.
People make note of your questions for Marie now, but I would like to move through all speakers.
Yes, I'm sorry, I really went over. Apologies.
It was extraordinarily interesting. I learned a lot. Thank you very much, Marie. And I hope you get lots of interesting questions.
And if we don't have time, I'll be happy to take the questions away and get back to people with some answers.
Oh, super. Okay, many thanks. All right. Can we now move to Rebecca Mason, who's going to talk to us about Iwi Marae Emergency Response? And Rebecca, could you also begin by saying a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, kia ora koutou. Ko tutu pāwhi mai, ko te hoiri te awa. Ko maswa hoteri te tangata ka kai waro te kaitiaki. Ko Ngāti Kui, Ngāti Apa, Rangatānei, Ngāti Kuata, Ngāi Tahu, Ngā Iwi. Ko Rebecca Mason. Ho, kia ora everybody. So I work in the emergency management space as coordinating executive group rep for Nelson Tasman and all of our iwi. So I've had a lot of experience in events, and I do lots of other governance work and work in the Iwi Māori partnership space. So kia ora everybody. I've got 5 minutes to try and take you through emergency management from an iwi perspective. So I'll go really very quickly. So when we think about an event, Te Tauihu, the top of the south, we're one of the leading regions actually when it comes to working alongside emergency management teams during an event. We've been heavily involved in event responses for several years now, particularly really started with the Christchurch earthquake. And so iwi here, we're involved in emergency management at all levels, governance, ops. We integrated fully within the Emergency Ops Centre, particularly in terms of operations and tikanga. We've got members on what we call the Joint Committee and the Coordinating Executive Group, which is the emergency management group that has reps from all of the main agencies and Iwi. And of course, during an event, our marae have always opened up their doors to everybody in the community. So I could speak about that for a day in itself. When it comes to preparedness, our 9 marae across all of Te Tauihu, across all of the region, I've been working on, in most cases, on emergency management plans, and also we have emergency containers on site in all of our marae, which means that we have another kind of facility should we need it during an event. So that's really quickly about events. We do get asked for advice nationally now, but in terms of how have we managed to become integrated with emergency management. When we move away from that and start thinking about adaptation, actually it's interesting because I think we're probably way further ahead than you think, Marie, so we probably need to connect up, because back in March, all of our marae met and we're working with a national team actually that's being led by Kiritapu Allen on marae climate adaptation. And so there are 4 objectives when we met. All of the marae came together and we met, which was to, 1, get an understanding of climate change impacts in terms of our marae, to learn about national and local initiatives, to kind of understand the importance of climate adaptation and approaches, and to start developing initial adaptation plans and actions for our marae. And so I was interested when I saw your climate change process. We actually used that climate change adaptation process when we were working through this. Our national team looked at available data and maps and then modelled out the level of our marae vulnerability to the various types of events like storms and flooding and sea level rise and landslides, etc. What we know from that analysis is that our marae are subject to medium to severe risk, particularly when it comes to earthquakes, obviously, for the marae, both in terms of our assets and also in terms of our resources. And so the next step is that each marae was undertaken to go away and then look at what would be their main adaptation kind of measure, or the main thing that they would be looking at and doing. We, as a region, are part of a national pilot that is going to be rolled out across the country. I think because of our vulnerability of our region and also because of our connections to Kiritapu, we managed to kind of get, for once, our region managed to get in on the first wave of a nationally led initiative. So that's been, that's an interesting process, and we will continue on that. And we're expecting some further really good news in terms of some additional, how do I put this, resourcing for marae right across the top of the south. Can't say too much yet, but it's a watch that sort of space. And then thinking again about adaptation, Ngāti Rārua are doing a really significant initiative around resilience and preparedness for climate change for Ngāti Rārua. And one of the things they're doing is they're looking at how would we combine science and mataranga Māori together when we're thinking about resilience and climate change. And in that initiative, they're looking then at wanting to see how this would lead to a climate adaptation plan and a decision support tool, which would obviously bring both worlds together when it comes to those decisions around priorities and decisions on how you might do things. So I'd also be interested that when council takes prioritisation into account, kind of how do you weave those worlds together. So, as I said, we also have been touching on preparedness, and that was the piece where all of our marae have been looking at emergency management plans, and we've got those containers. I think at an iwi level, we have more work to do. Just in terms of iwi themselves having a broader strategic kind of perspective on climate change, both in terms of, right across the spectrum in terms of preparedness and adaptation. We're pretty good when it's an event, but like many things with emergency management, as Marie said, resources get sucked into the actual events, and then the other elements around it tend to people do their best. So apologies that's so fast, and I know I'm talking very fast. I just wanted to get a few key points across on where we're at with in terms of climate change and emergency management and events. And again, at the end, happy to take any questions. So kia ora koutou.
Kia ora, kia koe, Rebecca. I'm bowled over by how far advanced you are in preparedness. Moving now to Andy Clarke, who's speaking to us from Golden Bay, Tukurua, and Andy has been working on this in his local area for quite some time. Over to you, Andy. Say a little bit about yourself.
Thanks, Joanna. I've lived in Golden Bay now for 40 odd years, and have always been involved either in local community things. I was community board chairman, I've been district councillor, and I unfortunately community runs deep in my veins, and I will carry on pursuing strengthening community at every opportunity. I'm also old enough to be pretty cynical about how to make change, because a lot of people like talking about it and then they do nothing about it themselves. So because I've only been given 5 minutes, you'll have to tolerate me reading my notes, which won't come across so fluidly as me letting forth with an unlimited time spell. But here goes. And I've got heaps to say, and what I leave out, you can ask questions about. Having spent a lot of time over the last 3 years trying to inform and upskill Golden Bay people in the areas of degrowth and lowering one's carbon footprint, I've come to the conclusion that there are lots of well-meaning people out there who like to talk about the issues but are not willing to act on the need to make any quantifiable changes in their lives for the sake of the planet. If people can afford to maintain all aspects of their current lifestyle, they will. In my view, a bottom-up solution by strengthening one's community is the only sustainable way to start to build resilience and then lead towards adaptation. A community emergency preparedness plan is a good place to start. We have all seen the consequences of climate change on the TV, which makes the issues real, pressing, and understandable. This makes it far easier to motivate people than trying to get people to modify their lives down a pathway to adaptation when their lives are just as they like it now and they really don't want to change. So I had been to various events held by Nelson Tasman Emergency Planning, and I took it on myself to put an emergency plan together, try and coordinate emergency plans for our local coastal area between Collingwood and halfway to Takaka. And because I live in Tukurua, that's where I started. And again, my notes will make it more boring. Tukurua has well-defined boundaries. We have the sea to the north, the national park behind us, a stream on one side and a ridgeline on another. Luckily, we also have a 40-year-old community-old water scheme, which is a physical and communal connection to almost all of the 37 properties within Tukurua. I just happen to be, again, the chairman of the Water Society, because the last one decided to toddle off to Richmond without getting our approval. The Water Society instigated a basic emergency plan 30 years ago which has never needed to be used, but it was overdue for a review. Fundamental to our plan is that Tukurua can be cut off from the 2 Golden Bay evacuation centres by flooding or storm damage, and it has done in the past. The main points of our emergency plan are: 1, a coordinator with a backup who is the sole contact between us and the Nelson Tasman Emergency Management. We also have defined boundaries between adjacent communities so that every resident knows which emergency community they are in. The Tukurua community is split into 3 neighbourhoods, each with an emergency response person and a backup. The reason for the neighbourhoods is that the emergency response person is within walking distance of all their neighbours if all communications fail and or the road is blocked. The neighbourhood split is also along lines of possible separation within Tukurua from flooding or road damage. All landowners and their tenants are expected to be 7 days self-reliant, i.e. no power or retail access. Any problems created by not meeting this minimum standard is not an emergency. Now, I have to emphasise that fact. That's an issue that's a request that's come through from the Nelson Tasman Emergency Management based on the Alpine fault letting go, is that 7 days is the minimum amount of time we expect to be isolated and without access to power or services. So we expect every property within our community to go down a pathway to meeting that standard. In a major event, it is the landowner's responsibility to contact their emergency response person with the status of all people on their property. If communications are down, then the neighbourhood emergency response person will physically contact each of their neighbours because they are within walking distance. It is the role of the emergency response coordinator and the emergency response people to coordinate local response to any emergency issues. So that's the fundamental basis of our emergency plan. It's all in writing, which you won't want to read, but that's an A4 piece of paper, laminated, not this copy, but there was 37 copies laminated to be distributed in the next 2 weeks to every household in Golden Bay, in Tukurua, and each property owner, if they have any residents, tenants or the like, they need to copy this off again and give it to each of their residents as well, so everyone knows who to ring and when to ring. Over the next 12 months, the Tukurua Emergency Response Group will be organising info and training sessions covering 7 days self-reliance, property preparedness against bushfires, etc. One of the main roles of the Emergency Response Group is facilitating a temporary accommodation, particularly for neighbouring low-lying coastal communities at times of sea storms or cyclones when access out of the area may be blocked. Having defined neighbourhoods is a great opportunity to strengthen the neighbourhoods through social get-togethers, but with a short info session on updates of emergency-related issues.
Sorry, am I the only person who can't hear you now, Andy?
Sorry? Someone said something.
Sharon, are you able to hear all right? Perhaps just carry on, Andy.
Okay. Having a strong connected neighbourhood is the most logical step towards long-term community resilience. Learning about what it takes to be 7 days self-reliant is the between wants and needs and the start of a more resilient way of thinking. In my view, greater individual and community resilience followed by adaptation has to start with the individual and lowering their carbon footprint to a sustainable level via a carbon footprint calculator. It is a logical way forward. Carbon reduction equates to cost reduction, therefore less reliance on money through purchasing less. A lower carbon footprint cross credits to a more resilient lifestyle and the lessons learned in the journey is knowledge to be passed on to your neighbourhood and community to join the individual in their journey. Sharing food, equipment, and labour within your neighbourhood is the next step to greater reliance and adaptation. And if you're not already doing this, then you're part of the problem. A strong, supportive, sharing neighbourhood is in a good position to not only spread their learnt knowledge and skills, but to help the less able in their community to be more resilient, lessening the burden on traditional support services. If you think your community would benefit from having their own emergency plan, then I've got lots of information that I can pass on, which I'm not going to mention now because I'm just about out of my 5 minutes. The comments I would make about pulling together an emergency plan is you need to focus on the landowner responsibility, but always invite the tenants to all functions for inclusiveness. 2, contact details are solely for the local emergency group's use. 3, illegal dwellings, and we have lots of them, it is Golden Bay after all, is not the concerns of the emergency group, but the safety of the occupants is. Resistance by some is inevitable. Emphasise that emergency groups want to keep you informed and that in an emergency you may have the skills or equipment to help others. Always go back to your community for its feedback, even if there isn't any, so they can't complain about not being part of the process. Am I over time?
You're fine, Andy. You're great.
Good.
Okay, I want to attest to Andy's amazing ability to bring people together in social occasions with shared food and his wonderful shared wine. Okay, on to Aniquah. And Aniquah, would you say a few words about yourself to begin with?
Kia ora. Thank you, Joanna. So just a few words about me. I am, my name's Aniquah. I used to work for Neighbourhood Support. I was a coordinator for about 5 years. About the role, it was really hard to leave, but I needed some other passions of mine. And I'm also a mum, and I have, and my partner owns a little coffee where I live, and also has played a big role in why I'm so passionate about community development at a street level and in urban communities. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about my learnings from being a neighbourhood support coordinator, particularly in urban spaces. And I'm just going to go through some key points that are some strategies that worked really well. So some part of that is start small. So what I would do is go into communities and talk about starting a Facebook group, just starting a contact list, having a get together, doing things that are authentic to those people who are in that group. So not everybody, wants to have social gatherings, but they might want to plant trees together, or they might want to, bake or on a project together. So finding those things that they really want to work on at that neighborhood level. Being realistic. So when people want to, when groups want to talk about, emergency preparedness around what are the realistic hazards in their community. If fire isn't going to be a hazard, go out and get all the deal with that, or don't, so prioritize planning for emergency events that are likely to happen in your community. Comes with a bit of research, and it comes with a few conversations around slips, flooding, things that I think are also really important if we're talking about like reducing emissions. So a lot of people want to have a grab bag, and a lot of the things that are in a grab bag we're in our homes. So just being really strategic about where you're putting those items, having grab bags what I do is I've got all my emergency items near my tramping pack. I've got my boots, I've got my my tramping gear. So if I do need to leave, I've got everything I need in one place. Not my food, but I've got a different strategy for that. Thinking about could be more strategic on emergency preparedness and not having to go out there and buy a whole new. That can be intimidating for people who don't have a lot of money or resources or funds. So I really enjoy going out into community, finding new different work on being prepared and in ways that isn't going to cost a lot of or be a financial burden. So if you these conversations starting to think about, well, okay, we've got these resources or we've got these skills in our community, what's missing? Do we need something? Do we need someone with a bit of first aid training? Do we need some training around risks, information, things like that? So do we need water tanks? What could your community fundraise for? And then who's missing? So we're having social gatherings or these tree plantings or celebrations or doing things out in the community or who it looks like they need a little bit of extra support. So I'm talking about older adults, youth, people who are coming from different cultural backgrounds who might need support, understanding emergency preparedness. You're already developing the bonds and the relationships that you need in those times, in the time of an emergency event. Celebrate where you live. So I think there's a lot, like emergency preparedness, and it can be this big, almost seems like catastrophic thing, but taking time to actually celebrate your environment, where you live, make a point of using those local parks. This is common land. We let celebrate the common spaces. Recently, I live in Atawhai, and there's some toilets. The Nelson City Council put some new amenities in there. So I had a toilet party to celebrate our new amenities, and because we actually really needed that in our community, and it was a great opportunity to get everyone together to share some stories, to learn about what other people are doing in the community. We have a seamstress, we have hairdressers, we have other local businesses, plumbers and builders. So it's just great to think about what people are doing locally, and how can you prioritize getting your goods and services to people locally that you're going out, using somewhere else to get those resources. Other things that are really great is volunteering within your community, water monitoring group.
Oh, Aniquah, we've lost your sound. Can you hear us, Aniquah? We've lost your sound entirely. Really sorry. Okay, let's hope the sound comes back for the question time, Aniquah. With a bit of luck, we'll be able to get you to answer questions. But I'll move on to the next speaker, and then hopefully we can come back to you in questions. Okay. Let me move to Jack. Jack, do you want to say a little bit about yourself and talk about beyond emergency preparedness.
Try to keep it very brief. I mean, I've been interested in community resilience for at least 20 years or so. I mean, part of our moving to New Zealand was to be part of a community that was dealing with climate change and energy issues. And I'm really encouraged to hear, what Aniquah and Rebecca and Andy have been talking about, as well as Marie, because there's so many aspects to this that are really difficult to deal with, and I want to address some of those. We know that we're going to have more disruption and more frequent disruption in the near future. I mean, that's what this is about, and that there's going to be consequences to our ability to meet our basic needs. And to me, it's really important to think about basic needs in this context of adaptation, because we know that they're going to be challenged increasingly and more frequently. We know what the climate impacts are. They're predictable and we know they're dangerous, but I think it's a mistake to focus only on climate. Pollution and biodiversity losses are already affecting food production and ecosystem services and human health. And these are global trends, and they're leading to more political and economic turmoil, and even social and violent conflicts, and more disruptions to supply lines. One of the things that really strikes me is that the evidence seems overwhelming to me that all of these dangers are the direct result of our grossly unsustainable civilization. If you think about it, not a single human system that services human needs is currently anywhere near sustainable. Not our food, not transport, energy, waste, housing, money, health, or business systems, and nor our political system, because it's failing to protect us and the environment we depend on. Now, I know these are not nice things to talk about or convenient or comfortable truths, but I think they're truths, and we have to face them. And the best time to do that is now, because delay will only make it harder and perhaps even impossible. A key concept to me that is really essential to keep in mind is accepting that we have distanced ourselves from the natural systems that provide all of our needs. All of the major threats we face in coming years can be traced to our collective and highly organized and currently inescapable overconsumption of natural sources and sinks. We are in an advanced state of ecological overshoot, and that's a terminal condition unless we reverse it. So it's obvious, but extremely challenging, that the action required is a dramatic reduction in the demands we place on natural systems as we plan to meet our needs going forward. All of the growing risk over the coming decades will disrupt our capacities to feed and house ourselves, to provide basic health care, and to enjoy leisure time. These events will challenge what it means to have a meaningful role in our community. How do we respond and how do we contribute in a time when these events are occurring more frequently? And so meeting these needs is a challenge for many people. Meeting these needs is a challenge due to the inequity and the inequality we've allowed to develop. So yeah, the traditional approach to emergency management and planning is still relevant, but I would argue that it's also totally inadequate to deal with an increasingly dangerous new normal. So what more is needed beyond emergency planning? Well, I would suggest the situation we face is unprecedented, so there are no easy answers. But facing these uncomfortable truths about ecological overshoot suggests we have to think collectively and creatively about how to change much of what we currently rely on and take for granted simple technical fixes, which is the dominant way forward in much of this, actually risks making things worse if they involve greater demands on natural systems, which are already overburdened. And the fact that we have rapidly approaching tipping points make gradualism a very risky option. So going beyond emergency planning will require a radical new mindset. We have to start with how we think about these things and focus on securing our basic needs locally while reducing our overall demands on natural systems. I would argue that governments alone are currently incapable of making the necessary changes without significant involvement, and I would add direction from the community. I believe the community must take a leadership role in developing this new mindset. I think what's required is that we come together and collectively decide how to ensure our basic needs can be met in an increasingly uncertain future. Working together with honesty, compassion, tolerance, humility, a strong sense of justice, and most of all, a reverence for the web of life is what appears necessary to redefine what being human's about. There are many, many inspiring examples of resilient community projects from around the world who are struggling with these issues that we can learn from and build on. But whether we can plan the needed disruption to our current unsustainable lifestyle with a new vision for living well together will determine how secure our basic needs will be in an uncertain future. Yes, adaptation requires resilience. I would argue that genuine resilience requires escaping ecological overshoot. So I would like us to think about adaptation as building a resilient and sustainable community to secure our basic needs. I think those are some key ideas we need to add to our traditional way of planning for these unexpected events. Thank you.
Thank you, Jack. That was a resounding call to major.
Yeah, a difficult one. It's not easy. I mean, the examples that Aniquah and Rebecca and Andy have all given about trying to do things locally, it's really, you can do certain things, but it's hard to deal with these larger issues and take the perspective that our whole system is unsustainable. It's a huge challenge, and I don't have an answer except trying to come together and work and create new ways of thinking about it together.
Thank you. So we will now open it up for questions. First of all, a big thank you to the speakers. People put a lot into not only preparing good material, but compressing it, which is a heavy demand to make on speakers. But okay, any hands up yet? Let me scan to see. Since I'm not seeing any hands just yet, I get a chance to ask a first question, which I want to address to Rebecca. Rebecca, I was very impressed by how far advanced the Marae planning process was, as you described it. And I wonder if you have any comments to make about how Marae organisations have been able to move faster and farther than many of us are moving.
I think in this case, some of it comes down to resourcing and having a very influential person in Kiritapu Allen at a national level who basically has direct access to the ministers. So that's made a significant difference. I mean, generally, iwi can move much faster because we can make our own independent decisions and we can resource ourselves if we feel the need. And so in this case, we just moved. generally, in lots of things, particularly when it comes to taiao and the environment, we just move because we don't believe, not just in terms of taiao, but in everything. We haven't got time to wait for bureaucracy, be it in terms of local government, which moves so slowly, central government, we will move on things that we think are critically important in terms of our values. I did have a quick comment, if it's okay, in terms of what Jack was saying. I think I absolutely agree with you, but I think it's not necessarily as radical. It's not radical when you look at it from a Māori perspective, because everything you're saying is exactly what we say and we do as kaitiaki. And so there's fundamental principles and lots of things, I think, in the world of te ao Māori, which are absolutely applicable to everything you're saying about us being overstretched. And, we all have to think about what is our role as kaitiaki of the environment. And we fundamentally believe we're placed on this earth that the environment and taiao is first. And we are the juniors in the relationship. And so therefore we are the kaitiaki of the environment, not the other way around, of the environment here to kind of feed us. So I just think it's interesting. I'll give one quick example that everyone might be interested in, that in Ngāti Kuia, we searched the country and couldn't find a multi-dimensional decision-making model, so we've made one ourselves, because we didn't have. And that takes into account 4 dimensions of obviously financial, people, cultural and environment. So when we're making our decisions, even commercial ones, we weave all 4 together. We have a model and sort of other stuff. But what I'm trying to get to is that when we think about the things you're talking about, Jack, when we think about that, we have to think about it within that broader context of all 4 elements of, coming together when we make decisions. And it's very tricky for people who are in a Eurocentric kind of place and organisation to do that, because the financial and the profit piece dominates over people, over culture and over the environment. So I will stop my rant and let someone else talk. So thank you.
That's very impressive, Rebecca. Thank you for that. Other questions or comments? Many of you will have given thought yourselves to these issues. So I encourage any further comments. In Jack. You're muted, Jack.
Yep. A question for Marie. Marie, I recall you mentioned something about how councils need to change to deal with this new challenge, sort of recognizing that we're really facing something unprecedented. And I wonder if you could perhaps talk a bit more about what you see as councils, how councils need to change to involve communities more and focus on some of these bigger issues, these more radical changes that might be needed.
Yeah. So like I was saying, the deep changes is like taking a systems approach is one of the first changes that need to happen. Of course, like the old, silos. And I think change is happening at the staff level. Like most of us, we're trying hard to create better connections between our pieces of work. And so we are trying to do this, but there are still the layers, the hierarchical different layers that make it very difficult to get there. But I know NCC at the moment is going through a restructure, so I do have some hopes. And some of my colleagues who've been in local government for decades say, "Oh, I've seen many restructures. They never brought what we hoped they would bring." But I'm hoping that here there is a true shift to try and integrate things better. And definitely that work that we are doing about the climate scenario, the transition risk and physical risk is a really good piece of work and really gives me a lot of hope that the dial is moving. And in terms of engagement with the community, it has to be a meaningful engagement and a slow one where we build our relationships first, where we establish some level of trust between the community and local government. So it will be a lot of cups of tea to have with a lot of people. And really, yeah, that's what I'm going to push for. But there is always a bit of a risk aversion from leadership in local government. It's just structural to deep engagement. But I think with the different examples we've got across New Zealand of really successful adaptation planning that I would call successful adaptation planning in places like South Dunedin has done a great job, and Westport, there are incentives now to change the approach and do that engagement.
Thanks, Marie. Any other questions? Oh, Bruce.
Hi, just a really quick one for Rebecca. Thank you. She mentioned opening the marae for any disaster, and I've seen that always happens. And I just want to know, does that get funded in any way, and does it get appreciated by politicians?
I mean, it does get appreciated by politicians because it's a good news community story, right? In terms of funding, it's been a moving feast, shall I say, over time. So in our region, the emergency management teams have actually had to work really hard to kind of circumnavigate the systems to a degree to get funding for just the kai, just for the food. We don't get reimbursement for time or anything like that, but even just getting reimbursement for the food is a bonus. When we open, often marae also have to cancel bookings, so we have lost revenue, which we don't get reimbursed for. But, the sad thing is, as a region, we're ahead of other regions where marae get nothing, and we will always open because of our values around manaakitanga. And always we would never not, no matter what the cost. So we're not so bad here, I have to say, and I do have to give a shout out to the emergency management teams, both here and in Wairau, who have been amazing to work with. And when I hear stories from elsewhere in the country, we're very grateful that we have such great teams here on the ground. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you for the answer, and thank you for that kind of support. It's always wonderful.
Jack.
I'd like to ask a question of not only the presenters, but of everyone present. It's a small group, and that is, if you accept the idea that we need new ways of thinking about this and new ways of working together as a community, what are your thoughts about a citizens' assembly as a way of focusing on these difficult issues and facing them together? Do you think citizens' assemblies could be a useful mechanism, or do you have other suggestions for how we can overcome the kind of bottleneck we have about not wanting to think about these really difficult issues and try to actually face these truths that are going to bite us if we don't deal with them?
Let me just quickly check if everybody roughly knows what a citizens' assembly is, or would anyone need a bit of an explanation for that? Was that a nod?
I think the explanation would be really helpful, Jack, just so that we're all on the same page.
Yeah, okay. Jack, go for it.
Well, it's basically a form of a methodology within deliberative democracy for bringing people together, generally a random selection of people rather than people with special interests. A random selection of people are brought together to try to reach a consensus on a difficult issue, and they're provided with input at a range of options and possibilities and perspectives, and the process is generally also facilitated so that everyone gets an opportunity to speak, and critical thinking is emphasized rather than rhetoric and sleight of hand. And these techniques have been used increasingly to look at a whole range of complex issues, including climate change at the national level and at other levels. And not too long ago, Auckland City Council did a citizens' assembly looking at their water needs over the next 50 years, I think it was. And a group of citizens was brought together, and this process was managed by a consulting group, and it came up with a recommendation that council didn't expect, but I believe adopted and is in the process of implementing. So it's yeah, there's lots of information online. I won't go on anymore, but
Okay, your question is would this help? Now, Charlie and Julie, you have your hand up. I don't know whether you want to answer this question or ask a different question.
No, responding to Jack's question.
Great, go ahead.
I've heard and read wonderful things about citizens' assemblies. It seems like a really good, solid process to come up with some out-of-the-box thinking. But I foresee two barriers, and we have examples of this. Government being delivered some results and then refusing to incorporate it into plans. I also perceive that there's a real lack of trust by the community toward government. Why should I participate in the process? Will they even listen? Also, just some pushback on, well, who's providing the information to the group? Is it biased in some way? Could the process itself be trusted? So it seems like all of these things would need to be a really important part of the extensive education for an effort like this. But I've seen, like you have read about, really fantastic results because it's totally outside the system. And like you mentioned earlier, Jack, the system itself right now is not serving us as well as it needs to. So the citizens' assemblies do seem like a good option if we can kind of address those other issues.
yeah. With respect to the difficulties that you mentioned, yeah, I think they're real, but not insurmountable. I mean, the option of are people presented with biased information can be dealt with by allowing the selected participants, the randomly selected folks, to ask for new information if they think it's relevant. So they're not they can request a particular perspective or outlook. Yeah. One of the main important things about it is people are working together to find consensus, which is antithetical to our existing political process and vested interests. It's more like a jury system.
Thank you, Jack. It's perhaps relevant to insert that in the climate forum, there's a small group of people who are kind of coalescing at the moment for the purpose of persuading Nelson City Council that this would be a good way of improving decision making. Let me just check on whether there are any further questions.
Can I just quickly comment that if people are not familiar with Citizens Assembly, there's quite a bit of information online. And in addition, another example of deliberative democracy is from Taiwan, where Audrey Tang has developed some virtual systems of bringing people together, and large numbers of people, thousands of people, to reach consensus on community decisions, which are quite powerful and perhaps even less expensive than some aspects of Citizens Assembly, or they can be combined technology or combined methodologies.
Thank you very much. I think that does bring us to the end. of our evening. And I do very sincerely want to thank the participants. First of all, Marlene, who looks after the tech in a way that really relieves the host of anxiety. Thank you very much, Marlene. And then to each of the speakers for preparing succinct, fact-filled, clear explanations of what's going on in your area of adaptation and emergency preparedness. I found it a very rich offering in the area, and I have a feeling that the recording of this will be particularly valuable. Subsequently, I suspect it will be referred to a fair bit. Okay. Interesting comments on chat. Thank you. A closing karakia, which intends to say, let's suspend the tapu of our coming together in this way. Let's clear the matters we've discussed away. Let's set them aside and proceed and be united. Kia whakairea te tapu, kia wātea ai te ara, kia turu ki whakataha ai, kia turu ki whakataha ai, haumie, huie, taikie. Thank you all.
Thank you, Joanna.